Welcome to the Thumbprint Project Foundation's docuseries, Childhood Domestic Violence, The Hidden Public Crisis. I'm Drew Schlossberg of Cloudcast Media. We're thrilled to have in the studio with us Kristie Bruce Lane. She is the founder and the CEO of the Thumbprint Project Foundation, joined by her colleague, Elisabeth Caetano. She is a marriage and family therapist. She is an author of Down the Rabbit Hole and also the founder of Navigate Changes. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
Kristie, we'll start about you. What got you into starting this foundation?
Well, I've always had a soft spot for children, but I will say that when my son was born, that's my heart outside my chest. And I believe that most mothers feel that way. And it really hits home when you think about other children that are out in the community that are suffering, and do they have the right resources? And, so I wanted to bring this to life to address a hidden public crisis that's going on behind closed doors that oftentimes goes unreported. And so I really wanted to build awareness in our community and build awareness for the moms out there who may be suffering under domestic violence. Let them know there's resources out there that will help them. It's not a situation they have to stay in. And really show the kids and tell them that we see you and you matter. And so that's what led me to start this foundation, and here we are.
Exactly, and also you're the executive producer of the series. We'll talk about that toward the end of the interview here. And Elisabeth, talk about your background.
Well, I have been practicing psychotherapy for over 22 years now. I actually, in my intern years, was taking trainings and working with the domestic violence population in some of the local San Diego facilities. And ultimately became licensed and went into private practice, and pretty much on and off have been working with the silent victims, the ones that don't get reported, typically to build up the tools and the skills that they need in order to navigate changes that are going on in their lives.
Right. And why aren't they reporting? Are they not doing the reporting, or is somebody not reporting for them?
Well, one of the reasons why this is such a huge issue is because a lot of times the women themselves don't recognize that they're actually in emotionally abusive relationships.
Right.
So the hitting typically escalates and can come later or even not at all, because the brainwashing is so total and complete, and the breakdown of self becomes, they're stuck basically. And they don't even know. So a lot of times when I have women coming into my private practice, they actually don't even recognize the signs of emotional abuse. And I can't even use the words domestic violence because that has a stigma attached to it, similar to alcoholism.
Right. So, but you in your book, of course, and in your practice, you talk about the tools and you give them the tools to navigate through this. Talk about that.
So what I found over the years is that I was teaching the same skills and tools over and over and over again, from self-worth, self-value, self-esteem, which I talk about in the book, to boundaries, to what's addiction, and there's the alcohol addiction or the drug addiction or the sex addiction or the gambling addiction. But the opposite side of that is the codependency, the disease to please.
Right.
And this is what I was finding across the board, especially for my women clients, but also for some men clients.
Right.
And so I write about all these things in the book, and it just went hand in hand to put in a chapter on abuse and what that looks like. And again, I don't, it's the queen off with her head, dovetailing on the Alice series, that's abuse, name calling, put downs, all of these emotional pieces that go into play. And so ultimately I put all of these tools in one book so that women specifically could learn how to empower themselves and really do anything that they wanted to do.
Right. So the number we hear are the domestic violence cases. They're reported and there's X amount. Mm-hmm. And then they're the ones that a lot of ones you deal with that aren't reported.
Never.
And is there a number? Is it as much? Is it twice as much? Is it 3 times? It's really hard to say.
It's hard to say because it's not reported.
Right.
It's not coming into, for instance, the door of hope.
Right.
It's coming through my door as how do I manage my life? How do I manage my husband? How do I change my husband? How do I love my husband enough so that he'll change? And so, and how do I make things good for my kids? And so it's that I can't give you a number. I just can tell you it's astronomical.
Right.
That's why it's the hidden issue. And that's why the children are the invisible victims.
Right.
They're all invisible.
Right. And especially with COVID,
Mm-hmm.
which has exasperated everything. We've talked about this during the series. And, what's interesting, and really, Kristie, hats off to you for coming up with this series. But now you're in an environment where those perpetrators are home. They're home because the kids are now seeing this because they're home because of distance learning.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are being abused are home because maybe they've lost their job or they're furloughed. And then the perpetrator in the same situation. That's a volatile situation, Kristie.
It is. And I think it's important that to know that the children are not passive bystanders in this situation. Their little eyes and little ears hear and see everything. And I think to build awareness in the community with families that just, there's time and a place to have these discussions with your intimate partners, maybe not in front of the children, and not have your children involved, because this sort of impactful, trauma that they witness or hear, it carries with them the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And they start to think, what did I do wrong? They basically internalize it and think it's all about them. And so we really want to build that awareness with our foundation, especially with this docuseries, that there's help out there and there's innocent lives being affected, the children. And so I think it's important, to point that out, that what you're modeling at home as parents, these children pay attention to. They're very observational. I have a 5-year-old, and I will tell you, he's very observant on what I do, my every move. He's always watching. So,
well, and to dovetail on that, there are studies that have been done that show that when two parents are fighting and an infant is supposedly asleep in the other room, their brain waves are off the spectrum. So they are affected on a physiological level. And people think, oh, well, my kids don't hear it. They don't see it. They're asleep. They're not asleep. They're wide awake in their beds from infant age all the way up to teenage age. And they get caught in the crossfire. And even those infants are invisible victims.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback really quick on Elisabeth. And I think me being a mom, what's important, now being a mom, we've all read What to Expect When Expecting. That book has been out for hundreds of years, it seems like. But what's alarming is what's not addressed in that book is, okay, now you have this baby. You still have to be responsible. You still have a duty to protect that child, out of womb as you did in womb. So to have some more awareness around, okay, now this baby's here. Now you need to expect this. If you do this, or if you behave this way, or you act like this in front of this child, this is impacting that child. So I think that's important.
Well, and not only impacting that child now, forever, for that matter. And who knows what gets unlocked 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, and all that business. And Elisabeth, I know much has been talked about in this series, of course, is, the violence that is just absolutely replicated, because it happens to me, because my grandparents did it to me, and my great-grandparents did it to them, and all that business. And breaking that silence is just so difficult to talk about that.
Well, we're only as sick as our secrets, and we're taught to keep the secrets.
Yeah, right.
And in psychology, we call it the transgenerational transmission process. So parents will say, don't do as I say, do as I say, not as I do, and they do as they see.
Right.
So breaking that cycle, while there's been a lot of talk about the different things that can be done from, let's say, social services points, we really don't teach the tools and skills that apply to life in general. So one of the biggest things, people say, why do women stay? I have no idea why women stay. That comes up over and over and over again. And one of the biggest reasons women stay is a psychological reason of the thought distortions that they have in their head. They are not in touch necessarily with the reality. They're in denial, which is one of the primary defense mechanisms psychologically. Little kids 2 years old, I didn't do that. Well, yeah, you did. Right. It's right there. We can see it, but I didn't do that. We don't want to be wrong. We don't want to be bad.
Right.
And so thought distortions, and then, as you've heard in the series, low self-esteem, not believing that she can do it, trying to keep her children safe or protected from the abuse. It's okay if you hit me, but then if you hit my kids, oh no, now, okay, things are getting serious. But they're trying to protect their kids. So the staying piece, that judgment is, if it was so easy, why don't they just leave? Well, let's say I have about 10 pounds I need to lose. And if it was so easy, why wouldn't I? So that's the analogy that I use, is that it is just not that simple.
Right.
Yeah. And for the parents too, when this is going on, I mean, they have to realize that this is the version of love that their child is witnessing. So when they see mom get hit, the child will internalize and say, if you say you love mom and you're doing this to mom, then what are you going to do to me? And the fear sets in. So,
well, and so again, going back to psychologically, to Kristie's point, many children will internalize, but many children will also externalize.
Right.
So now you start to get problems at school. Now you start to get bullying.
Yeah, right.
Now you start to get physicality happening at schools. To your point, Kristie, they are now experiencing that love equals hitting. And that is an acceptable way to manage anger and frustration and uncomfortable emotions, because that's what they're seeing at home.
And it's passed down, absolutely.
Yes, it is.
We are chatting with Kristie Bruce Lane. She is the executive producer of this docu-series, Childhood Domestic Violence, The Hidden Public Crisis. She's also the CEO and founder of the Thumbprint Project Foundation, joined by her colleague, Elisabeth Caetano. She is the founder of Navigate Changes, the author of Down the Rabbit Hole and Back, and also a marriage and family therapist. I'm Drew Schlossberg for Cloudcast Media. Talk about EMDR. What is that?
So EMDR, the acronym stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. So
Can I just call it
EMDR? Yeah, let's just shorten that, because that's a mouthful for me too. I feel like I have marbles in my mouth. So that is it's the theory is that the disturbing event, the trauma, big T or even little t, gets trapped in the brain, and it wires in with the same emotional thought process and physical sensations that come up when triggered, as if it's actually happening again. And so you've probably heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, where these feelings, emotions, the images are actually re-traumatizing, and the brain itself wants to heal. So the analogy that I use, the layman's term, is when you get a cut on your arm or your finger, your body knows how to heal itself. And you might need to help it. You might need some stitches. You might need, if you break a bone, you might need to put, a cast on it. But that ultimately, when we do this bilateral stimulation, it actually helps the brain to release the traumatic pieces and connect to functional brain activity. So in essence, we just set up using a protocol that puts the brain in the cast, so to speak, to heal itself.
Is this a new research? Has this been around? Probably.
No.
I'm not sure if anything's new these days for,
Right.
Right.
It's actually been around for quite a while.
Right.
What got me really interested in it is the quick results to both very specific traumas, but also long-term little traumas that we're building up. If you look up EMDR on good old internet, look up MRI, and you'll see EMDR, it's lit up like a Christmas tree in red, and post EMDR, there's just little bits of red, which is why we use it with our returning vets who are suffering from PTSD, because we found it to be very effective.
Right. Is there a certain population that is more predisposed to be perpetrators? Obviously, we talked about those who have been abused as kids, obviously, that fall into that. But you bring up PTSD, and you're very serious, obviously, and we know suicides within the military are up at epidemic numbers.
Proportions.
And without question, there's many reasons for that as well, in that aspect of it. But is there a way to try to catch this to the perpetrators before they're actually perpetrating, so to speak?
Well, again, part of the problem is the transgenerational transmission process. So these military vets, they're going off to war,
Right.
and they're just reinforcing anger and techniques of fighting. And
Right.
so they come back. And so again, that's why I wrote the book, because we go back to these are life skills and tools for both men and women. The misnomer for the men who are perpetrating is, they're strong and macho and full of themselves, and their narcissists is thrown around all over the place. But the reality is they have incredibly low self-esteem.
Right.
They have abandonment issues.
Right.
And they're utilizing power and control in order to not be abandoned, which
Right.
sounds crazy. But ultimately, that's part of what's going on, is this underlying transmission process. A, they've seen it, and B, they feel it.
Right. And that sort of makes sense to me when you think about it, is that if you have low self-esteem, one of the ways to overcome it is to actually act out, take somebody else down, okay, make you better than somebody else. That's been around for a zillion years as well. So the book, okay, Down the Rabbit Hole and Back, okay. What gave you the inspiration? Just all your work as a marriage and family therapist?
Yeah. And also I reread the original Alice in Wonderland book. And what I realized is that there were a lot of life lessons that were inherent in the book. Now, whether or not C.S. Lewis, intended that or not, or just a romp for kids,
Right.
it didn't matter, because, for instance, the Duchess violates boundaries while digging her chin into Alice's shoulder. And so that is something I pull out of the book. Of course, the Queen of Hearts, off with her head, dovetails beautifully with, abuse, both emotional and the physical. And then the self-esteem, where Alice, is saying things like, I knew who I was yesterday, but that was yesterday. Who am I today?
Right.
And so it mirrored the confusion, I think, that happens in general. Again, whether there's domestic violence or not. It's how do we, and we've heard the word resilience.
Right.
How do we practice resilience? And I love Brene Brown, because she came up with an actual, ladder of, here's some bullet points to look into. But it's really learning a different way of living, instead of in fear, living from, and scarcity, instead of living from a place of anxiety. We live from a place of abundance. Now we get into positives. Now we get into positive psychology. We get into gratitudes. So all of this is actually being studied now scientifically and showing that it rewires the brain. But you go back to the caveman days, and you've got one woman and another woman standing at the mouth of a cave, and one goes, hey, let's go in and explore. And the other one says, heck no, we're going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So the one that's all excited goes in. She gets eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. She comes running back out and goes to the village. Tons of anxiety, tons of fear. Well, guess what gets passed down biologically? The anxious, the negative, the look out, the Chicken Little, the sky is falling. And so the good news is we can rewire the brain and overcome some of that negativity bias and negativity biology that we've carried with us from the caveman days.
Right.
And I'll say too, with Elisabeth, she sees the patients, but a lot of the women come forward and don't even know they're in this situation. And so I think going through, having a resource like Elisabeth and a marriage and family therapist really walks you through that and meets you where you're at, and takes the time to really dive into why you're there, and then give you tools to navigate through it, and then give you tools to set boundaries for yourself. Because for the women out there, I want to say, for the viewers and the listeners, it is okay to set boundaries. Not only is it okay for you and your health, but for your children as well. You setting those boundaries sometimes is the saving grace to what your kids will witness and hear or see. And so, her work, Elisabeth's work, is really good. And especially with the tool through Down the Rabbit Hole and Back, it's a valuable resource that's actually a workable resource. It's actually a workbook within the book.
It's available at fabeverafter.com. That's not Navigate Changes, but Fab Ever After.
Okay.
So I'm actually launching a new website and a movement,
Nice.
Fab Ever After, to empower women to empower themselves.
Right. So. Much has been written about mental health, and much has been ignored by mental health. And it always amazes me that here we are in the 21st century. Can't believe we're actually, a fifth of the way through. And we still have this stigma
Yes.
with mental health. And you go, are you kidding me? We haven't advanced that far? And the answer, of course, we haven't. And it shouldn't be. It should be, listen, person has some mental health challenges. We should be able to treat it. No different. You don't look at someone with a broken leg, or, they broke their leg. For God's sake. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's actually an analogy I use all the time when it actually comes to if you do need a boost, if you do need to take, let's say, anti-anxiety medication or antidepressant medication, is that, we don't even question it with diabetes or a broken leg. We go to the doctor, we deal with it. And I think the destigmatization, again, in the book, I talk a little bit about this, is that people want to know what to do. And it's easy. You go to the doctor, you go to the ER, you get a cast on. And so it's more about, instead of telling me about your childhood and, let's stay in victim mode and let's stay in this negative space. It's more, who are you? What are your tools and skills? What is your situation? We do some reality testing. As Kristie was speaking of, I have to kind of go in the back door sometimes. I can't even use the word domestic violence. Right. It's a tricky thing, but I think that we do need to do better as a society. And I think Thumbprint is doing a good job of this, where we're saying, hey, this is actually should be as normal as brushing our teeth.
Without question. And again, it lets people know that they're not in this by themselves. They're in this with people that can, help them in that vein as well. And I know, Kristie, that's something that you and I have talked about, how important that mental health aspect is, especially what you're doing with the foundation.
Yeah, it's very important. And this is just one aspect. I mean, when we see our homeless out on the streets in San Diego, you often say, what happened to that person? You wonder, where did it go wrong? But as an adult, it's really hard to unravel all those levels of trauma. And that's why, as an organization, we're coming forward, being very proactive about let's address it at impact. So for the children, that's why we focus on the children, is let's not go down that path with the child. Let's get them on a path, a good trajectory in life, so they don't carry these things with them. So they're not always in survivor mode. Because I'll tell you, kids cannot dream when they're constantly surviving.
Well, I think, some of this is going to be just so beneficial for people to say the least on this. And I'm sure you'd agree on this, Elisabeth. That's why you're doing the foundation. Kristie, is you really got to talk a lot about this. You got to get it out in the open. You got to let people know there are places for you to go. Again, it's the most obvious statement, but sometimes humans don't do the obvious. As you know, you're a therapist and you just marvel at, really? Well, that's why we're human, in this aspect. So, the challenge is, that the folks you see, okay, and that you have seen and will see down the road, what's like number one on the list? Is it, they're all so important? Obviously, maybe self-esteem, or they think they've deserved to be the victims of violence. Is there a number one, or is it they're all meshed together?
Well, what I see across the board, because I also do see emotional perpetrators that have, emotionally got caught up in the system, but they didn't get jailed. And a lot of men actually do genuinely want to change, or don't know that they're being abusive, and they get a wake up call because the police ultimately get called or something. But what I see across the board, so alcohol and addictions come into play hugely. Number one, but it's actually the thinking that goes with it. So I talked earlier about addictions and codependency, and the piece that is across the board are the thought distortions. So both parties use the same unrealistic thinking errors, which are the main ones are rationalization, minimization, justification, denial, and blame. And across the board, when you start hearing the language, like I said, whether it's a woman who's in an emotionally abusive relationship or it's a man who's doing it, and again, for purposes of statistics, only about 5% of women batter. Right. And it's typically just a one-off. It's built and built and built, and then they blow. Right. Whereas with men, it's pretty consistent, and it just builds in intensity.
Right.
So it's really addressing, first thing for me, not even self-esteem, because again, I have people who come in, I don't have self-esteem problems. I feel great. I have a good job, and I have 2 kids, and my life's going well. And, well, okay, you do, but we'll get there. So I can't say that.
Right.
But it's really starting to address these distortions that get reinforced culturally, societally, family, and by the perpetrator.
Yeah, yeah. With that question, so what? I mean, again, that's why you have a book out here. Down the rabbit hole and back and stuff like that. So filled with plenty of tips. Is there a website people can look you up?
Yeah, I'm at navigatechanges.com, and the book's available at fabeverafter.com.
Go ahead, Kristie.
I was going to say something too, just to tag on to the distortion. There's not only a distortion of self and what's going on in the family, but there's a distortion amongst the communities looking in on what they see as a successful family. Maybe you have, a dual career family who looks like they're living the high life, that everything's a success, everything's so happy. They have a happy smile on their face every day. Their kids are dressed well, always well prepared. Just everything you'd want to see in a family. But what's going on behind closed doors is key here, and it's the hidden part. And literally, you could be living right next door to somebody that this is happening behind those closed doors. So it's this distorted sort of view the community even has of people's lives in general. Like, look deeper, because you don't know what's going on when they're behind those closed doors.
And don't judge.
Yeah,
that's huge.
And what's so interesting about that statement, and it is so true, and again, I'll go back to the same analogy about mental health. I mean, how can we not think that's not a big issue when we try to hide it? Like if something was wrong with a person, a little scarlet S on him or something like that, or a scarlet MH.
Scarlet M.
Scarlet MH or whatever the case may be. And it's the same thing, what you're just describing here as well. You're not in that household. You don't know what's going on behind closed doors. You don't know what they're going on X, Y, and Z. And it's not that you want to have this negative attitude about anything can happen and everyone is, a crazed lunatic and all that business. But it is amazing how many people, and then you hear this shock of, I can't believe that happened to the Johnsons. Are you kidding me? They're out there mowing their lawn and they're doing fine. And next you know, the wheels have come off.
Yeah, and so often it's coined as a family matter. Like this is a family matter. It's not a family matter. It's a societal issue, and it involves our community. You have to realize that these kids that are involved, they're not only your kids, but they're our kids. They're our community's kids. Yeah. We care about them. When we hear stories of children getting caught in the crossfire, could be some that even actually die from being caught in the crossfire. Our community mourns. We mourn right along as if we were the parents, because these kids in themselves, they touch so many lives. They're out there. They're touching, the teachers. They form bonds with teachers, with coaches, so on and so forth. So our community mourns when we hear this. And so it becomes not a family matter. It is a community matter. And I think that coming together as a community and providing resources, and as we're doing in this docuseries, to show that we are a community that cares. There are resources out there for you is very important. The awareness, we really have to wrap our arms around awareness and get that out there.
Yeah.
And with that awareness is this education approach to therapy that I practice, where what are we going to do? What do I need to learn? How do I implement something different? So even to Kristie's point, that the people who, let's say, don't have emotional abuse, but my BFF comes to me and says, you know what, my husband, he's always so controlling and I can't ever go anywhere. I can't do anything. And I want to get a job, but we agreed that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. True story. I have a girlfriend going through this right now. Okay. She gets out of the relationship. She's in some ratty, dingy apartment. She hasn't worked for 7 years or longer since she's had the child. He's not giving her a dime, even though he's the primary breadwinner. And so now she falls into the lowest SES bracket, even though I normally see middle SES and high SES in my practice. She's in now the lowest socioeconomic rung of the ladder and is barely surviving. And her son is now treating her this way, because that's what he sees modeled, and he's a teenager.
And he thinks that's the way that normal behavior goes. We are chatting with Elisabeth Caetano. She is the founder of Navigate Changes, the author of Down the Rabbit Hole and Back, and a marriage and family therapist, and also joined by my friend and colleague, Kristie Bruce Lane. She is the CEO and founder of the Thumbprint Project Foundation and the executive producer of this docuseries, Childhood Domestic Violence, The Hidden Public Crisis. Kristie, so when you came to myself and my colleague, Charles Parisi, and said, I got an idea about X, Y, and Z, I want to do a docu series. And of course, we jumped on it. Thank you, Charles Parisi, for doing this, the founder and CEO of Cloudcast Media. Here we are, 8 episodes in on this. Has this met your expectations?
It really has. And in fact, it's much bigger. To see the panelists come forward, the thought leaders, our community leaders, to join in on this effort to bring more awareness to something that is so hidden. It's a hidden public crisis that's been going on a long time. And in light of the pandemic, COVID hitting,
right.
It really alarmed me. And, we wanted to launch the docuseries later, but when the COVID hit, I knew these children were trapped behind closed doors. I knew that they did not have a voice at that point. Their lifelines were severed. Teachers can't see them anymore. And typically teachers are the first to see the bumps and bruises.
Right.
These outlets for the children to go to play while maybe the parents are struggling, all of a sudden they're all caught in one house, and with stay-at-home orders, the tensions are high, especially with underlying domestic violence. That is not a recipe you want to, really deal with. But so I said, let's launch this sooner. Let's get this done. And I'm just so grateful for all the thought leaders who have stepped forward, who care about and have shown to care about these children in our community. They are our future generation.
Well, and this content's going to live for quite a while. It's something that is very practical today. It'll be practical tomorrow, and it'll continue to be. And I think there's going to be a lot of, runway with this series at all. Elisabeth, any final comments?
I think it's important to just highlight, like I said before, that we all need to know what these tools and skills are, whether we're experiencing emotional abuse, domestic violence, addictions in the home, because if I know what to look for, then I can hear it in my friend, and then I can go as a community or as let's say in my circle of friendships and reach out and support. But if we don't know what we don't know, we can't do anything. So it is important to get the tools and skills across the board and destigmatize mental health, because it's such an integral part of who we are. We are emotional beings as humans first, not rational, logical. So getting into that and really digging into that and teaching that, even at a young level, it's vital.
Absolutely. Kristie, any final comments?
Yeah, I'd want to wrap and say that, for the community, it's about awareness and it's about education. For the families who are struggling with domestic violence, and for the moms, there's resources out there. Just reach out for help, because we know it starts in the home and it can end, and it has the end in the home. And for those children out there that are struggling, we want you to know that we see you and you matter.
Without question. Well, Elisabeth, thanks for joining us. Great content, no surprise. Thank you for your support of Kristie's Foundation. And Kristie, congratulations. Just getting started here. There's a lot more to go. And so I'm Drew Schlossberg, Cloudcast Media, and you've been listening to the Thumbprint Project Foundation's docuseries, Childhood Domestic Violence, The Hidden Public Crisis.